Hi, I'm William Malik with your bit of security for Monday, the 17th of March, 2025. Today, we're going to be talking about using AI to detect threats in various systems. Um, AI is really good at aggregating vast amounts of data and detecting patterns, projecting inference, making, let's say, informed guesses about what may be going on. As new data arrives, the model has to make a choice. Does it either incorporate it in the learning set and therefore change its conclusions or modify its projections, or does it treat the new data as a case against which its thesis should be validated in order to say yes or no? Here's the problem. When you're running a system and want to do threat detection in real time, AI can fall down. The first is that the learning process, figuring out what's going on in the system, requires a lot of time. You have to monitor the system in steady state for a period of 4 to 6 weeks in order to get a sense of what it is that's going on in your system. You can't use an AI model trained on someone else's system. The average mid to large enterprise has thousands of applications, and they don't all run every day. So the results from Corporation A will not be helpful for Enterprise B. Some activities that Corporation A does would never show up in B, and some activities that B does would never be mapped and modeled and therefore treated as potentially hostile threats in the new world. So during the time, you need to sort of leave the system in its bare and unprotected state. That's a risk. Unless you run a conventional anti-malware tool, including the downloading of updated patterns or signatures and the scans that that anti-malware tool would do. You want that activity to be included. You're not going to rely just on AI alone and throw out your scan-based system. One particular area within this domain that's problematic is year-end processing. There are some activities that only run annually for various reporting requirements. Used to be EEOC, for instance, or financial results, statements of customer, determining compensation for salespeople and setting targets for the new year. You don't run those processes frequently, you run them annually. And as somebody who wrote some of those for a large financial institution at the beginning of my career, I can tell you that they touch data and modify fields that are otherwise left alone the rest of the year and therefore would look like anomalies. So you don't want your year end to be flagged as bad. In fact, year end processing is usually crucial and extremely time dependent. You want your results to represent what's actually going on, and you don't want to have to rerun and restate results a couple of months down the road. So that's a big challenge, making sure that your processing is timely without leaving the system unprotected. The second area that's a problem with AI-based is that it assumes the system is behaving in a healthy, normal fashion during the training process. This leads to two potential sub-problems. The first is that if there is already malware in the system, then the AI will assume the behavior of that malware is business as usual. In the case of SolarWinds, for instance, the bad guys were on board for over a year before they actually launched their attack. And so, although SolarWinds had an AI-first anti-malware tool running, it never detected the activity, malicious activity, during the year that was in place. Unfortunately, that meant that it was blind to those activities when they turned even more malignant later on. Another problem is that during that training process, if a bad actor were to inject processes into the system that could be used maliciously later, the AI would incorporate those as being normal parts of the training set. So in other words, you have to start with a clean system in order to train your AI. Well, now note that when you install an antivirus product, traditionally, it's going to run a scan for known viruses, but it doesn't take the conclusion of that scan as saying this system is clean and therefore predicate that all further scans will be based on that assumption. Quite the contrary. when new data comes in, a conventional anti-malware scan will say, whoa, we never knew about this, but that there's bad. AI is going to be a little slower on the uptake. The third problem is that its resource cost is very, very high. Monitoring processes that run real time takes an enormous amount of overhead. As a programmer who worked in the operating system for the mainframe for a number of years, I can tell you that about every 7 or 8 instructions, you encounter a conditional branch. A test has to be made and a decision has to be made about the flow of control, which will change subsequent processing. In order to detect that at a fine-grained level, you have to have code which will notice the existence of a branch, determine the conditions that set that, and take a snapshot of the environment and then store that data in some kind of log. The fastest process I've seen for that is the functional recovery routines used in the mainframe system, and that's 7 or 8 instructions, not counting the overhead associated with transferring the data to a solid state device. That's the quickest thing available. And if you're waiting for a write to hard disk, that'll take thousands of times longer than the cycle speed of the machine you're running on. So in a best case environment, ignoring the cost of the data transfer, you will double your overhead. You'll have your throughput to do effective monitoring. Or you can say, well, we're only going to look at every 10th branch. Well, you've just missed 90% of the exceptions. Physical hard drives are an order of magnitude slower than SSD, and SSD are a couple orders of magnitude slower than your cycle time. So in sum, we're leaving the system unprotected for a month or more. We're assuming that what everything ever is going on during the training period is good and there's no bad data injected. And we're hoping that there's no attacks on the system, and we're hoping that nothing slips through the cracks. For cybersecurity professionals, hope and faith, they may be two of the great virtues, but they're lousy strategies. Defense in depth means running scans for known malware rigorously and training the AI on those scans as a normal part of the business with tightly defined parameters allows you to know that the activity, the read and writes that are going on, are predictable and are secure and trustworthy. AI can help assess unfamiliar processes, but don't put it in real time. That's our bit of security. I'm William Malik. Be safe.